I constantly think about how different I would be if I had grown up on Earth. Given the slim possibility that I could have aged into a normal, functioning member of society, I doubt I would have ever touched beer, much less any alcohol. I was sure there were other deeper, more haunting reasons behind my father's lunacy, but the alcohol only fueled his irrational rage. Yet here I was in a back alley pub, drinking enough beer to take down a gorilla. The year was 1931, a very different time than my native years. Regaining my physical form had meant nothing to me except for pain. I couldn't even tell myself why I had come back to Earth, much less how it was a good idea. I should have stayed in the other realm, rather than expose myself with a frail, vulnerable body. But I had to pursue the general and free the dozens of souls he had stolen from the other realm. The moment I had arrived, the pub's sign was in my view, a good starting lead on finding him. When I knew for sure that he hadn't been in the bar, I took a seat, and with a sigh, I ordered a drink. To think, the last moment I'd experienced on Earth had been 56 years ago, when I was only 5 years old. Now, although I was mentally aged 61, I was able to set my age at 30 upon reconstructing my body. I still had my wide eyes and pale skin, with no hair whatsoever on my head or my face. I had to steal my clothes from a bum lying against the trash can outside the pub. Thankfully, I was still able to observe this world from the other realm, allowing me to keep up with everything that had changed in half a century. That was an important advantage, given that an ignorance of the modern world would triple my efforts in finding that wicked man. He could be out doing anything right now with the kind of power he had taken, most likely hurting people. I could see a similarity in him the moment I had seen his essence in the other realm. Just like my father, he was too far gone to be reasoned or trifled with, indicating just how dangerous my mission was. "Do you need another, sir?" the bartender asked, and I replied by simply nodding, obviously not in the mood to communicate with other human beings. This place was a rat hole, anyways. Just a long, rectangular room with a bar going across it with several tables to one side. All the Irish decorations were worn out, decaying within a miserable pub that had long passed its golden time. As the old-timer serving me set the cold glass on the bar, I sighed, taking a big first drink. I waved my hand to motion that I would soon need another, as the buzz I had was convincing me to let my mission go for the night. I would need time to find more clues if I wanted to catch this scent. "Having a rough night, are we?" I heard another voice speak as a man sat on the stool to my left. I didn't even bother with looking at him. As he soon realized I wasn't going to acknowledge him, the man simply shrugged and ordered a beer. "But not the kind he's having," he quickly commented to the bartender in a humorous tone. I could tell he meant it in good fun, but I still remained quiet, drinking my beer in peace. It wasn't that I was trying to be some big macho man. It was that I hardly knew how to talk to other people. I mean, we're talking about an emotionally scarred kid that spent over half a century in another dimension where his only neighbors were howling ghosts and spirits. Not to mention that I had absolutely no desire to look anyone in the eyes, much less let them get a glance at my own. I was just happy to have a hood over my bald head, so I could look down at the bar to keep my eyes out of their sight. As I finished my glass, I took the next, motioning for the old-timer to bring me another. The man beside me took a much slower approach on his own drink, obviously not in the pub for the usual reasons. "I've never been much of a drinker myself," the man suddenly said, staring above the bar at the display bottles. "I find that enough of it tends to make people ugly, and who wants to see ugly people?" My eyes narrowed as I found a reason to actually speak. "It makes them monsters," I corrected him, remembering my father all too well. "There he is," the man chirped. "I guess I hit a soft spot, and that's the only reason you're speaking to me, huh?" The more this man opened his mouth, I realized he had a man's man type of voice, one that would just shoot stars in women's eyes. Instead of talking to him once more, I simply nodded, keeping my face damn near pressed against the bar. "Did you see the bum outside?" He cracked up laughing. "Was naked and everything, just running around saying some ghost man stole his clothes." "Oh, that's nonsense," the old-timer replied as he brought me a pitcher instead of a glass. "He's just strung out on drugs. You know how those alleyway moochers are." "You don't think that's a little prejudged?" the man beside me asked the bartender, finishing his beer and motioning for another. "Not at all," the old-timer griped as he set a fresh cold one on the bar. "Those bottom feeders say they see all kinds of garbage. If it isn't monsters and dragons, it's guys running around in masks, fighting each other with superpowers. They're just nuts in the head, plain and simple." The man laughed strangely, taking his time with the second beer. "You don't believe in the all-powerful crime fighters?" he commented, and the old-timer scowled. "Fiction was never an interest of mine," he responded, pouring himself a mixed drink. "The world has no time for such imaginations." "Oh, come on," the man chuckled, taking a sip from his glass. "Are you saying there isn't even a small part of you that believes they exist?" "No," the old-timer huffed. "If you ask me, the mob is the only thing we have to worry about. They are a real problem in a real and sober world." "The world isn't sober," I murmured, breaking my silence. "It's a drunken, flirtatious fool dancing in the distance with its inner demons, becoming an influenced monster in its own right." The man beside me chugged the rest of his beer and set the glass down. Well, that was an eye-opening moment, if I say so myself. I one-upped him by slamming the last half of my pitcher, motioning for another. I had to admit I was very, very intoxicated. But another, followed by yet another, sounded like a real treat. Thank goodness the bum I'd robbed had a wallet full of money he had stolen from another poor fellow. Karma works in mysterious ways, I suppose, at least if you believe in such silly concepts. "Like you said," I told the man as he received a third beer, "alcohol makes people ugly." "Indeed I did," he said in a joyous tone. The old-timer set a full pitcher before me, and I set to work on drinking it as he walked away, mumbling about how he shouldn't even try to debate with drunk idiots. "What is your name?" the man asked me, and I gulped, not sure if sharing my identity was a smart thing to do. "Daniel," I answered him in a calm, cold tone, still refusing to look up. "Daniel Edwards." "Well, Daniel," he said my name sternly, "are you from around here?" "Not at all," I muttered, not even sure where here was. "Where are you from, then?" he asked curiously, and I was beginning to regret even opening my mouth as I grunted, finishing my second pitcher. "I'm from the East," I murmured, uneasy with the fact that I couldn't remember the name of my former home. The man laughed again. "Would you happen to recall what state?" I appreciated his attempts to make small talk with me, but my anxiety wouldn't allow me to make the same effort. "No," I said quietly. "Just the East, near the ocean. That's all I can ever remember." "Classic case of amnesia, yeah?" "Hospitals can't fix what's wrong with me," I told him, shaking my head as I shifted uncomfortably on my bar stool. "Just don't remember anymore, that's all." By this time, I could tell the man was no longer comfortable due to the way I was responding to him. As several minutes went by, he quietly finished his beer and was handed another. The old-timer recommended that I should pay my tab before I got another pitcher, so I told him a regular beer was fine instead. To repay the man beside me for his friendly gestures, I decided to ask him a question that I actually needed the answer to. I needed to know where I was if finding the general was going to be a possibility. "What city is this?" I asked him, finishing my drink once more. The man frowned. "You've had a few too many, haven't you, friend?" He then laughed and placed the money he owed on the bar. "I'll have to get going on that note. You're in Chicago, by the way." As he began to walk towards the door, I tilted my head. "Well?" I grunted and he paused for a moment. Well? He repeated dumbly and I rolled my eyes. I gave you my name, I said, finally looking up at him, revealing my eyes and all. Just who the hell are you? You can call me Rich, he told me, and after a quick smile he made his way out, exiting through the front door rather than the one into the alleyway. Who was that guy? I asked the old-timer, and he grunted, shaking his head. I don't know, he said in a grumpy tone. I usually recognize everyone that comes in because they're regulars. But you two guys are first-timers. May I add that I wouldn't mind never seeing you in here again. At least you're honest, I grumbled, leaving more than enough money on the bar for my tab. And for that you'll get your wish, at least on my half. I stood up and made for the door, just now realizing how drunk I was. As I finally stumbled my way to the exit, I stepped outside, back into the dimly lit alleyway. It had to be slightly past midnight, and there were no signs of life. The man from before obviously long gone. I was far too intoxicated to find anywhere else to sleep, and I didn't want to be anywhere unfamiliar until I was sober. I noticed a pile of black garbage bags and shrugged. Screw it, I decided, hobbling over to the pile. I haven't slept in half a century. I didn't waste time getting comfortable, instead just plopping right down into the middle of the pile. As my wide eyes immediately closed, I fell to a deep sleep, the first one I'd experienced in a long time. Good night, pointless world. It seemed like an instantaneous eternity ago that my young, naive conscience awoke in another realm, fresh from the trauma of hearing my father gut my mother. The eternal darkness of my new home couldn't blind me to any of my pain, but instead gave me reflections of it everywhere I looked. Thousands upon thousands of moaning, whimpering spirits wandered the realm, searching for nothing. Perhaps this was a sort of purgatory that my mother used to speak of during my early studies. A place for the souls that couldn't or refused to pass on to the great beyond, forever stuck in this black abyss of cold emptiness. After several hours of searching this bizarre, never-ending place, I quickly found that it remained consistent. What truly puzzled me was how something like that could work unless it was indeed another realm, separate from the home. My mind wept as the souls never stopped groaning or calling out phrases, displaying fragments of who they once were. As I hovered from place to place, I couldn't identify any spot different from the last, making it difficult to mark anything. Hello? I eventually called out upon realizing I could speak. Can anybody hear me? The spirits just continued with their usual routine, not taking 1 second to notice me. What is this place? I loudly asked, actually trying to speak to the clusters of spirits. Please tell me where I am. They said nothing, much less take any notice of my presence among them. It flustered me to be condemned to such a dark place with absolutely no answers or anyone to talk to. That was the very moment I realized something. As my eyes caught notice of a familiar ghost mixed in with the rest, I nearly screamed. If I had hands, I would have attempted to rip him to shreds, despite the fact that ghosts can't be touched. Instead, I hovered closer and studied him for a moment, a complete sense of disbelief washing over me. Was I simply dreaming? What the hell? I asked myself, staring into the lifeless eyes of the particular soul. What unnerved me was that this was the spirit of my father. He didn't recognize me, but I recognized his ugly face, only with a far more hollow expression than when he was alive. He floated with the other spirits, moving slowly while moaning to the great beyond. Perhaps this was my punishment for being too weak to help my mother when she was butchered by this madman. He had taken a kitchen knife to her, while I simply wept near the front door, too terrified and cowardly to do anything about it. Not that I believed for 1 second that I could have actually done anything to make a difference, but as her son, I should have tried. I could have distracted him long enough for her to attack back or even escape. Despite how young I was, there was always a will to sacrifice myself for others. The only difference now was that I was already dead, and there was no one left alive that I cared about, much less knew. "Mom," I murmured sadly. "I'm so sorry." I could only pray that her soul had gone to some sort of paradise and not this dull, wretched nowhere. How in the world had I gotten here? That ran through my mind as I continued to stare into my father's cold, hollow expression. I remembered everything so vividly, but could not explain how my presence here was even possible. This creep had killed my mother, and then planned to do the same with me. The only thing was, the ghosts had taken notice of my cries for help and acted on their own, tearing into my father until there was nothing left of him but bloody pieces. I figured they would lay into me as well, seeing as I was the cause of their disturbance. But they didn't, instead leaving me to vanish in a flash of white burning light. Until then, the spirits I'd seen had never taken notice of me, or the living world whatsoever, confusing me as to why they chose that moment to intervene. Usually they did as they do now, aimlessly floating from place to place, moaning as they ignored everything else around them. Did they bring me here? It was crazy to think their zombie-like brains, if they even had brains, could orchestrate such a thing. Yet here I was, nothing but a lost conscience, rambling to itself in a void. Then the weight of an entire world smashed upon me. Avoiding the obvious question had passed, and as I asked myself why his spirit was here, I lost it. I could feel nothing but untamed anger at the fact this demon wasn't in hell, but rather in a place where he was too lost and gone to feel any pain for his crimes. This had to be a nightmare, all of it. Nothing about this terrible, revealing experience could be real. Once I thought about it, something horrid clicked in my brain. I was the key factor in my family's downfall. Being the freak child that I was had most likely caused a gap between my parents, leading to my father's drunken retreat from the outside world and all of its attachments. I looked into his gruesome, empty face, and if I had eyes, they would have narrowed. "Can you even hear me?" I asked his spirit, and when he didn't respond, I calmed myself. As I looked away from him, my mind raced, considering all sorts of different possibilities and outcomes. It was from that second on that I blamed everything that had happened, solely on me, staring back angrily at my father's spirit, ready to tear this entire place asunder. "I hate you!" I screamed as loud as my childish voice would let me. "You've ruined everything! You're a monster and I hate you!" Of course, nobody would answer back as my voice echoed across the dark void. I was alone, my only company being the only other condemned souls here. Maybe my mind and spirit would eventually go mad just like theirs. At least I hoped so. This is where I would be cursed to spending the next 56 years.